bit of background picture, if my clicker decides to go. This week's been a bit of chaos, and the reason behind the chaos is what's happened in the rest of the world. So when eventually the slides work, we can get to looking at what the rest of the world's had happen. Now we've got a black screen, but that'll work. So across the world, things have been going from worse to worse, and it's upwards now of 600,000 new cases every day. And yesterday, the US hit 200,000 new cases in a single day. And so Adelaide, the health authorities have been watching what's going on around the rest of the world and deciding that if anything happens here, they're going to go hard and go early, which is exactly what we saw this week. And in Australia, we saw what happened in Melbourne, that tried to fight against the tide for a little while and then decided the only way to go was to lock down. And in fact, we've only got one country in the world that decided against locking down and trusted that people would do the right thing, and that's Sweden. And last week they gave up on that and went into lockdown. So if we look at the rest of the world, we can see why what happened this week happened. And I guess what I want to do is go through a few of the highlights or lowlights of this week so we can see what we've got going on. So on the 17th, there's a bit of a change in restrictions. People have noticed the pizza boxes around the corners. Well done. Took a few seconds there. And so on the 17th, we had an increase in restrictions to 100 people, yada yada, and a few other things going on. And then the next day, there was this massive change because one individual was claiming that they'd caught the virus and their only contact with anyone else with the virus was going into a shop to buy a pizza. And so the health authorities were really concerned that they had a particularly infectious strain loose and a really short incubation time. And so the only way to keep people safe was to immediately stop everyone moving around while they could sort out who was sick and who wasn't. And so we had this sort of rapid change in direction, and all of us told to go home and stay home until 6 days were up. And then there was a bit of a change. And I think most of us, who's got a fridge with at least 2 weeks worth of food sitting in it currently? Yeah, because we all bought a bit of extra food, didn't we? And do we really need it now? No. Do we need it then? No, not really. So on the day after that, the truth started to come out that the story wasn't quite the same. And in fact, this individual had worked next to somebody else who was infectious. So we're actually back to just a normal close contact spread, which is what we're used to. And so the health authorities changed direction again and moved back to, basically, as of today, we're back to where we were last week. And that's an increase in the caution we were using, but that's also what's required. Again, if you look at the rest of the world, the slightest slip up and it's off. And that's not what we want to see happening. As well as doing that, there's probably upwards now of 5,000 people, that was a couple of days old, that number, are put into quarantine. So if you're anywhere in contact, so if any one of us today is here and is shown to be positive, all the rest of us get a 14-day holiday. At home, Medi-Hotel, whatever the risk happens to be. And so this whole process of this week has really been a wake-up call because we needed a bit of a wake-up call. So I wanted to run through the current set of restrictions that are in place, and it may only be for another week and a half. They're not quite sure what's going to happen, and I guess it depends a bit on what happens with this cluster. If it continues to grow and trickle around, then we're going to stay at this sort of level. If it doesn't, then this is more than what's required. So at the moment it's 1 person per 4 square metres, and then you can read the rest of those things. For us as a fellowship, for places of worship, it's 100 people plus staff. Unfortunately, if you were meant to be playing sport, you can't for the next week and a half. And at the moment, as I said, the planned end date is start of December, but we're not quite sure yet because that obviously has to be the right decision for the right time. The other chaos that happened this week was the initial news conference was saying that masks were going to become mandatory, and we're all looking at how we get hold of masks when they're not available. Well, quite a few of us have planned ahead and have our masks already. But the reality is that the need for masks or the not need for masks still sits with whatever the risk level is. So as the risk level goes up, then the need for masks goes up. But still the safest thing is for us to stay away from people. So that 1.5 metres physical distance and keeping your hands clean, those things are going to do most of what a mask can do from closer together. So I'm sure all of you have read the pretty picture there and the changing in colour from very low to high risk depending on who has a mask on and who doesn't. And I guess that depends on where you're at and what you're doing. So the current recommendation for South Australia is where physical distancing isn't possible, that it's recommended people wear a mask. Now that's obviously public transport, an enclosed space, so the supermarket on Wednesday was in an enclosed space, I must say. And if you're delivering personal care, then you should have a mask on. And also somebody who's personally at risk if they're going out. So if you're somebody who's at risk of COVID and you're going to the supermarket, then that's why you've got 2 ticks and boxes as to why you should wear a mask. But if you're wearing a mask, it needs to cover your nose and your mouth, and you cannot touch the front of it once you've put it on. Otherwise, it's not really doing the job it's designed for. So that's enough for masks, I think, for today. And Darren's tip, who's missed them? No, I haven't missed them either. Oh no, there's a few hands that have gone up. But it's been 3 months between the last of these and this one. And I've actually gone back to one a scripture I used in the 2nd or 3rd week of all of this. And that is complacency. And I think a lot of us here in South Australia were becoming very complacent because there's been nothing much happening. You watch what goes on in the rest of the world and you decide, well, I'm safe. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it talks about, therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. And if this week's done nothing else, it's shaken us up enough that we won't be complacent again for a while. And I think that's probably a good thing. And for us as a fellowship, there's a second part to that, is that we need to make sure we're not being complacent spiritually. In that while it's currently a bit more complicated to get to a meeting, and it's become even more complicated now, it's really important that we're not complacent with our spiritual walk, and we still continue to make sure we're doing what we should spiritually to maintain ourselves. Just like physically, we should follow the rules and make sure we're safe from COVID. I'll just leave it there. Thank you very much.